For me, following behind what Trent just said, turn me down just a little bit. Knowing how crucial this calendar is, we were sharing with our friends at Covenant Calendar yesterday, and the comment was made about whenever someone asks the question, are you ever going to stop teaching about the calendar? Well, we've just begun. And let me just give you a little insight. When you hear me stop teaching and talking about the calendar, listen to me carefully. You had better have found yourself a bunker. Did you hear what I just said? You had better have found yourself a bunker, because that's when stuff is going to begin to happen exponentially. And we're really excited because Abba is revealing these things to his bride. And if you don't feel like that you're part of the bride of Messiah, then I don't know maybe where you feel like you fit in. But I'm convinced that the calendar, these divine appointments, that Abba initiated them from the inception of creation for the express purpose of having intimacy with his bride. And if you're not interested in that intimacy, then perhaps the calendar may not be important to you. But I want to share this with you. We have spent the last 6 opportunities that we had standing here in front of you as a representative of what we believe Abba is sharing with us. And our whole intent was to lay a solid foundation upon the Melchizedek Creation Covenant Calendar. And the purpose for that was because we believing that it is being revealed so that the believing bride of Messiah may finally, listen to me carefully, I'm emphasizing that, finally celebrate without hesitation or confusion these holy convocations, these seasons of intimacy, which have been given to us as a body, as a means to encounter his presence. Moreover, as we attend these rehearsal ceremonies for the wedding that is soon to come, listen to me carefully, so that you can understand why he's restoring the calendar, because there's some difficult days in front of you. And if you're not careful, according to what we read in Daniel chapter 7, the enemy is going to, quote unquote, wear out the saints. I am not going to be in that company. Amen. We're going to be part of the bride of Messiah, and we're going to be at these holy convocations, and we're going to be given specific knowledge that is going to be reserved for those who will be in attendance at these holy convocations. In addition to that knowledge, you're going to be given wisdom, insight, and direction so that you can commit yourself faithfully, not only in observing those convocations, but as your level of maturation and your trustworthiness goes, he's going to begin to put more and more in your hands, more and more responsibility and accountability as it regards stewarding the kingdom on his behalf. Did you hear that? I believe with everything in me that this is the single most important subject that has come across my desk in 40 years of ministry. And we have committed everything that we have to this endeavor. As we stand here at Remnant Manna United, it seems as if we're kind of like Elijah on the backside of the desert, that there's nobody else except us. There may be some, but I know that there are a lot, quote, bigger ministries that are teaching opposite of what we're teaching. But we've been given a mandate, just like if you were in the military, we've been told to hold the line at all costs. So it doesn't matter the assault that may be sent our direction. It doesn't matter what the enemy's intent is. It doesn't matter what those who have good intentions, the road to hell is paved with those, by the way. It doesn't matter the good intentions that some may have. If you're not teaching what Abba's giving you to the body of Messiah at this particular time in creation, you're going to be guilty of scattering the sheep. And Jeremiah said, woe to those that do that. We believe that these calendar dates, these divine portals, are gateways into his presence, and they become a means, listen to me carefully, because these are rehearsals, and the purpose, just like Trent was alluding to, is to allow us to strip away all of the fleshly restraints and constraints that would inhibit us from walking in what I believe are some powerful supernatural dimensions that the body of Messiah in the form of the original Adam was intended to walk in. You have to ask yourself right now, Where are the supernatural manifestations of his presence in the earth? Where are the tremendous miracles? Where are the dead being raised, the lame being restored, the blind eyes being opened? I'm telling you, Abba's revealing these things to us so that we can step into a different dimension supernaturally that the church has ever been in, aside from when Yeshua walked on the earth. And we're about to embark on a rocket ride in the supernatural that is going to make what the disciples saw pale in comparison, because Yeshua said this regarding the end days, regarding you and I, this group, this company right now: greater works than these shall you do. Why? Because I am going to my Father, and he's released the Ruach HaKodesh that is going to enable us through the unction that we're receiving at these set apart times to do exactly what he said we could do. I believe that grasping the significance regarding the restoration of our understanding, the calendar doesn't need to be restored. It has always been there. We just need our understanding of it to be restored. And in addition to that, we need to also understand that he is restoring the function of those priests that have been sent to administer the calendar. What was the purpose of the calendar? To allow us to have intimacy with him, and the priests were the ones that stood there to mitigate things between Abba and the people. And you have been called. And a lot of us, when we were in the Christian church, we said, oh, we're kings and priests. There was a move 30 years ago called King's Kids. How many of you ever heard that? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm a king's kid. I'm entitled. I heard this one guy say that when he drove up to the supermarket or any place like that, he always expected a parking spot right in the front door. And I'm thinking, what about the handicapped person? Sometimes being a king's kid means you need to learn how to be a servant. Amen, and not a hireling. And so what Abba's doing, he's restoring this understanding to the body of Messiah, and how the priests that administer these holy convocations are to serve him and to function in the office that he's called us to. And we are on the cusp. Listen to me carefully. I'm making a prophetic declaration. We're on the cusp of the greatest outpouring of the Holy Spirit that has ever been seen upon the earth. This is how important I believe this calendar restoration, the Melchizedek Creation Calendar, is. I believe that. If you don't want it, that's fine. Go about your way. But if you want it, here it is. Come and get it. Say amen. Our last teaching, what we tried to do was to expose some of the fraudulent tendencies of the Enoch calendar, the 364 Enoch calendar. And the way that we tried to do that was to place it alongside the 360-day Melchizedek priestly calendar. And the purpose for putting them juxtaposed or beside one another was to allow you a scholarly choice so that you could look at everything that we present and you make the decision without anybody trying to force you or compel you to do so. Today what we're going to do, we're going to look at another 364-day calendar, slightly different than Enoch. Even though it has its roots deeply inside the Enoch calendar, I believe that it's even more detrimental to the union that I believe is coming in front of us, the union of the company that's called the Bride of Messiah. Having said that, I want to be careful. I'm not trying to be heavy-handed. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be dictatorial. I'm just going to do my best to state the truth and let you sort it out. Say amen. Before we go any further, I want to remind you, here at Remnant Manna United, we declare every aspect of a blood-ratified calendar must be found within the confines of Torah and substantiated throughout the Tanakh, as well as the New Testament. If you cannot find our Messiah, Yeshua, walking with his footprint, this calendar or any other calendar, you need to set it aside until you can go back and do some scholarly research yourself and prove that. Every one of us that stand up here in this platform to address you, we love extra biblical evidence. I love that. I've studied the book of Jasher, the book of Enoch, and just numbers and numbers of other things. But I'm going to tell you this: if it detracts from, if it departs from, if it cannot be found in the Torah, then it cannot suffice as a credible calendar candidate. at least not as far as information that would suffice you for celebrating a calendar other than the 360-day calendar, which I believe is unequivocally able to be proven from Genesis to the book of Revelation. And so now, having said that, sort of as a preface to what I'm about to begin to reveal to you, and we've got a lot of territory to cover this afternoon. If you haven't gotten these notes, then you need to do everything you can. Contact us, and we'll put the notes in your hand so that you can go back and look. This is a compilation of hours and hours and hours of research and information that you're going to get overly medicated with in about an hour and maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. How many of you remember Popeye, the cartoon years ago? Popeye said, "I stands, all I stands until I can stands no more." When you can't stands no more, let me know and you can go, okay? The rest of you hanging with us. There are a lot of similarities between this calendar that we're going to look at this afternoon, called the Zadok calendar, and the Enochian calendar of our last study. In fact, Zadok adherents take their position from much of Enoch. On the other hand, their year, similar to that of Enoch, begins the day after the equinox, when the shadow is marked, and it also becomes the fourth day of the creation, fourth day of the week, based on what they look at in Genesis chapter 1, regarding the creation week that was set in motion. And it's not an accident, if you go back and look, that there's also a lot of confusion, because there are some followers that actually suggest that the year begins on the equinox instead of after. So there's even confusion in their ranks as well. The 364-day calendar year has 12 months or 30 days, except, as with the Enoch calendar, the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th months, where there's a day that's intercalated, making the month 31 days. Again, if you have to add days to your calendar to make it fit, something's wrong. Let me just ask you this. We could have, or make this statement, we could have a 380-day year. But if you know when to mark the shadow, and the following day becomes the first day of the year, the first day of the new month, then it does not matter how many days you see after the 7th month, because all of the holy convocations mentioned in Leviticus are celebrated between the 1st and the 7th month. Whatever happens after the 7th month, and I know you're probably thinking, what about Purim and what about Hanukkah? We acknowledge them, and they have their purpose, but not like the holy convocations there in Leviticus chapter 23, including the Shabbat. So anything after the 7th month, it doesn't matter if you have 380 days. As long as you know when to start the year and to set your calendar in motion, then you count 360 days. You can celebrate that 360-day calendar within the confines of a 365, 354, 364, 380 day. Did you hear that? Okay. Their festival dates are fixed, the Zadok and Enoch calendar. And based upon those presuppositions that you find in Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 14 through 19, their holy convocations cannot fall on a Shabbat. And if you know some of the studies that we did previously, there are numbers of indications where several holy convocations, especially on the Sabbath, significant events took place. Go back and look at part 6 of this teaching. And so our first effort is going to be to look at one of their major points. And the major point that I want to focus on is that the Zadok calendar was the calendar of choice prior to the Babylonian captivity. And what we're going to do in order to expose the counterfeit, at the same time, I'm going to dig deeper, and we're going to look deeper and handle even more the genuine calendar. If you know anything about finances, you go to any bank or any lending institution that handles paper money, and they will tell you that very rarely do they have an opportunity to train with counterfeit money. Why? They don't need to. They handle the genuine, they handle real money, if you'll allow that term, every day, so much so that when something that's counterfeit comes through, it's instantly recognizable as something's out of sorts. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to handle the genuine, the Melchizedek Creation Covenant Calendar, and we're going to handle it so much that when you see these counterfeit, even though they may be very close, you're going to find, no, they are counterfeit, they're fraudulent, there's some things that are wrong here. We've handled the genuine, okay? So what calendar was kept prior to the Babylonian exile? There was a statement made in a very well-known magazine in the Hebrew Roots community And that statement was this: understanding the Zadok calendar, and then in parentheses, the calendar last used by the priesthood of the temple prior to the Babylonian exile, is a very serious study. Well, with that statement in mind, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at a very powerful biblical signpost. And this signpost, or marker, if you will, is not only supported biblically but historically by most scholars who collectively agree that there was a major change in the length of the solar year that occurred during King Hezekiah's day. And I'm sure that you've probably heard of King Hezekiah. He's sick on his deathbed. He petitions Yahweh. Isaiah comes to him, and Abba gives him a sign. Remember the story? Isaiah 38, 2 Kings 20, 2 Chronicles 32. For clarity, this particular event is chronicled in ancient history as occurring around 700 BC. Listen to me carefully. 75 to 100 years prior to the Babylonian captivity. And so if that's the case, and we want to find out what calendar was in use prior to the Babylonian captivity, we're going to look at a calendar that was in use 75 to 100 years prior. Is that okay? Now, let's look at this. Hopefully you'll be able to understand what the truth is here. Now, it should be remembered that the incident regarding Hezekiah, as I was alluding to earlier, involved the shadow of the sundial of his father Ahaz going backwards 10 degrees. And we're going to look at that in depth. And you're going to see some things regarding this event that you probably have never seen before. That's why you need to do what 2 Timothy 2:15 says. Study to show yourself approved, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, by rightly dividing the word of truth. The information is out there. We're living in a season where there's absolutely no excuse for you not to become informed and educated, and there's absolutely no excuse for you not having the opportunity to go back to the original language of creation, Hebrew, and excavate these things, these traditions that have been handed down to you that are fallacious. And then if you can't do that, if you can't take the time to go back and do that, it's nobody's fault but your own. And so if you're content to remain in your traditions and in that bondage that traditions sometimes bring, that's fine if that's your case. It's at this historical mark that the nations record the lengthening of the year by 5 days to the current 365.24. Did you hear that? Okay. Yeshua kept a calendar while there was a 365.24 solar year. But he did not keep the Roman calendar. He did not keep the Hillel solar lunar calendar. And he did not keep the Enoch calendar. In fact, I've shared with you the last time I taught that he actually used some stuff to reference the Enoch calendar. And I'm here to tell you that what he did throughout his entire life was point people back to the Melchizedek Creation 360-day calendar, which was in force from the inception of creation until the end of eternity. Abba has not changed. Has he changed? We're going to look at some things. Now, there's conclusive biblical and historical evidence that provides confirmation of this 360-day calendar prior to this event, which I said just a minute ago regarding Hezekiah that prompted the change. With that said, hear me carefully. I'm going to share this statement with you, but before I do, I want to preface it by the fact that one of the leaders in the Hebrew Roots Messianic community just recently made a statement that you really can't substantiate the keeping of any calendar from the Torah. Did you hear that? That's what he said. You really can't find any specific calendar to keep within the confines of the Torah. But yet, the Zadok calendar adherents believe that there's a 364-day calendar that we should now be keeping. Well, if it's not proven from the Torah, what are your sources? Help me out with this. I submit to you that if the only way that you can keep a calendar is by assuming that it's correct by consulting extra biblical sources, you also have to qualify those sources, because for 70 years after they were revealed, they were kept in strict control by the Vatican. And all of us that are not within the confines of the Catholic Church have been called Protestants for generations. Protestant means that we are protesting some of the things that the Catholic Church believed in. And I'm not trying to just expose the Catholic Church. I'm just telling you, if you're calling yourself a Protestant, that means Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, Episcopalian, Charismatic, whatever, Assembly of God, you call yourself a Protestant. What are you protesting against if you're embracing everything that they're trying to send down the pipe? Are you listening to me carefully? Now, if there is no evidence in the Scriptures of a valid calendar, then where are you getting your evidence from? What is your source? Here, we reply to that simply with one word. That's rubbish. That's two words, actually. And I want to ask you another simple question. How can we keep the commandments regarding the Holy Convocation? These are commandments. Go back and read Leviticus chapter 23. These are my feasts. This is what he says, not your feast. If they were ours, if he'd given them to us, that would give us the wherewithal, if you will, to change them. But since they're his feasts, no man, no entity has the right nor the ability to change them. Okay? And so, if that's the case, how can we keep them if there is not evidence of a true biblical calendar? And let me just ask you something else. And this was mind-blowing because I did this research for you, okay? If you can cherry-pick your calendar from the Qumran scrolls, which is exactly what Enoch and Zadok has done, then why don't you embrace all of the other disturbing Qumran text? Because I asked you here just a couple of weeks back, if it takes a little bit of leaven to leaven a whole loaf, then how much leaven are you willing to tolerate? If it takes a little bit of sin to disqualify something, how much is it going to take before you decide I've had enough? If it takes just a little bit of error to make something suspect, when are you going to go back and look to find the truth? Are you hearing me? Let me just share some things with you that is in the Qumran text. No one is to eat on the Sabbath day except what has been prepared. He's not to draw water with any vessel. No one should go after an animal to pasture it outside his city except for 2,000 cubits. No one should move anything into or out of a house. No one should open a sealed vessel on the Sabbath. In his dwelling, no one should lift a stone or dust. Listen to this next. This blows my mind. The wet nurse should not lift the baby to go out or come in on the Sabbath. A wet nurse is someone who's asked to provide milk for a newborn, aside from the mother. And here it says that the wet nurse cannot lift the baby to go or to come out in on the Sabbath. No one should help an animal give birth on the Sabbath day. And if it falls into a well or a pit, he should not take it out on the Sabbath. Doesn't that contradict what our Messiah said? Let me just skip down. The ancient Qumran community was so strict about the Sabbath that their rules did not even let them use the restroom on that day. Oh, you don't believe that? They taught that on the Sabbath, a member was not to walk more than 1,000 cubits outside his city. However, the communal latrine was 1,500 cubits outside the city to present grossing Yahweh out. So how did they solve that problem? Go back. This is recorded. Josephus, the historian, recorded this particular stuff that I just shared with you. So, for added emphasis regarding the calendar of choice prior to the Babylonian captivity, it is well documented both within the Tanakh and in extra-biblical historical documentation from over 30 ancient pagan civilizations that the 360-day calendar, in fact, was kept by most of the entire known world at that time, including Babylon. How many of you remember the story of Esther? King Ahasuerus. It specifically states that he held a feast for 180 days. Go back and look at it. That's based on the biblical calendar. What he was trying to do was flaunt the fact that they had not been let go out of captivity in the face of Yahweh and in the face of the people, and he was keeping a 360-day calendar, and he was king over 127 provinces, which indicates that his reign covered most of the known world. Oh, I don't know if I believe it. Go back and look how long that the Esther and the other ladies had to go through purification rituals, and you can find that it was based on a 360-day calendar. The numbers are there. My goodness. We also contend that even after the year was lengthened, that you could still adhere to this 360-day calendar based on marking the shadow of the Tekufa after the equinox, and Yeshua is our supreme example. So with that said, it's our considered opinion that Hezekiah himself kept a 360-day calendar. How you believe that? How can you say that? The evidence, I believe, is there when you read about Ahaz's sundial incident. And it's also confirmed 75 years later, 75 to 100 years later, when Daniel records some prophetic events that's going to be happening in the days in front of us. And every scholar that looks at biblical work, in particular regarding Daniel, would say that Daniel was making his statement, his prophetic utterance, based on a 360-day calendar. So is Yahweh fickle? Is he in the midst of a 365-day year? Does he have this man keeping a 360-day calendar? Which it's evident that Daniel evidently did. And yet, at that same time, since Zadok adherents believed that there was a 364-day calendar in use, what's going on here? 364, 360, 365.24. Which one is right? You have to ask these kind of questions, and then you have to be willing to go back and do the legwork necessary to bring the proof. Can you say amen? Now, a prudent person should ask this question. If you agree that Yahweh doesn't change, could you agree? Malachi 3 verse 6, Revelation 13:8, he says, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. In Revelation 13, he doesn't change. Well, why keep any calendar then? If he doesn't change, why keep any other calendar? Because the 365 is not recorded as the device used to measure the Holy Convocation. A 364-day is not used as a device to measure his Holy Convocation. It's not anywhere in Scripture. But it is clear that the Torah relates specific dates and times syncing these holy convocations based upon a 360-day year. And if Yahweh doesn't change, or if he is fickle and he does change, then why send Yeshua to sanction by his birth, his death, and his resurrection a 360-day calendar during a 365.24 year? And finally, tell us that the Melchizedek Creation Calendar will be in use again in the future events that are revealed, called the last days, in the book of Revelation. You see it in Daniel. You see it in Ezekiel. Why would Yahweh tell us all of these things if he doesn't change? See, inquiring minds need to know. Let me ask you this. If there's no way for us to keep it now, then why would Yahweh advocate for us to keep a fraudulent one in the meanwhile? Think about that. If we can't keep a 360-day calendar, then why would he say, okay, it's all right, go ahead and keep a 365.24 or 354-day? If he does do that, then it's my considered opinion that he cannot judge anyone who observes the Sabbath on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday instead of the seventh-day weekly Shabbat. Did you hear what I said? The seventh-day Sabbath is part of the creation cycle. It has not changed. Neither has the Melchizedek Creation Covenant calendar changed. And so what you have to go back and look is how these things have been massaged and handed down to us, I believe, at the intent of the enemy. All the way back in the Genesis account, Lucifer himself said, I'm going to ascend into the mount of the congregation, the Moadim, for the express purpose of compromising the intimacy that's found between the bride and the king. And that's what he did. And so based on what I've shown you thus far, in my opinion, it is not conceivable that the Zadok calendar, 364 days, could have been in operation in Babylon prior to the exile as they testify. You have to just ask yourself, what was the year's length? If the evidence historically is here that it wasn't until Hezekiah's day that the length of the year changed from 360 to 365. Come on, the evidence is there. And it's recorded by at least 30 pagan nations historically worldwide. Are you listening to me? Then why would I want to argue regarding a 364-day calendar when it's evident it went from 360 to 365.24? Is this making sense? So let's look at Zadok, his identity and his calendar. There's a lot of dispute, and it angers a lot of those that adhere to the Zadok calendar, as well as a lot of people that are looking forward to the days coming when there's going to be a third temple, because to build a third temple, there has to be a resurgence, if you will, of the status of the Levitical priesthood. And so what they're attempting to do, those that are looking forward to the restoration of the Levitical priesthood, they want to link it to the discussion of Zadok that's found in the book of Ezekiel and the temple that Ezekiel's talking about. I believe that Ezekiel is alluding to a temple that's not made with hands, by the way. But there's a lot of biblical and historical data, if you would go back and spend the time looking, that exposes some fallacious things regarding Zadok, the individual. But before we get there, I want to address a couple of points that we can see in Ezekiel for a minute before we begin to look at Zadok. Why? Because I want us to handle the genuine in order for us to be able to identify the counterfeit. Can we do that? Let's start in Ezekiel chapter 43, 10 and 11. This is Abba speaking to Ezekiel, and he says, Son of man, describe, listen, this, there's more to gleaning from the scriptures than just reading. You need to be able to read. You need to read all the time, but reading and study is two different things. So when you're studying, you need to be able to just break this thing apart. You need to reach in and dissect it. It wouldn't hurt if you took one paragraph, one sentence, spend the time to go back and look in the original Hebrew language, look at the syntax, the way that the structure of the sentence is put together, look at the way that the word had been originally used, look at the individual letters and break this thing apart, get to know it, dissect it. How many of you ever were in school and dissected anything in a class? And yeah, frog, I got you. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to dissect this first. Son of man, describe the temple to the house of Israel. Now he's talking about this futuristic temple that has not yet been built, but it's going to be, okay? Describe it to them that they may be ashamed of their iniquities. Stop right there. He's going to describe a device that when the house of Israel sees it and looks at the description of it, it's going to cause them to be ashamed. You got this so far? And then after they're ashamed of how they have sinned, evidently when they look at this particular pattern, they're going to look at something prior to that they've mishandled or misunderstood that's caused them to have sinned against something previously, because this one in front of them now is going to cause them to be ashamed for something they've done in the past. Is that making sense? Okay? And then he says, let them measure the pattern. The pattern of what? The pattern of this temple that I'm showing them now. Why would I want to measure this temple's pattern? It leads me to believe, simple deduction, if you know anything about construction, if I'm looking at something that I'm going to build now, and I have evidently done something in the past that's looking at this one's going to make me be ashamed. If I'm a builder, I'll say, well, I built something in the past that was wrong. I didn't follow the directions correctly. This is why I'm ashamed. Are you beginning to get this picture? Notice what he says next. He qualifies it. And if they are ashamed of all that they have done, then make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangements, its exits, its entrances, its design, ordinances, and all its forms and all its laws, and write it down in their sight so that they may keep its whole design and all its ordinances and perform them. Can I ask you a question? The first instance that we have of a temple or tabernacle being built was that of Moshe in the wilderness. And the sole purpose of building that temple was so that it could pattern something that was revealed in the heavens, right? Subsequently, it became a living pattern or an example in the earth after what was written in the stellar heavens or what was depicted in the stellar heavens. Every subsequent temple, Solomon's temple, they try to make you believe that Herod's temple, it was not. It was not patterned after the stellar luminaries, and we'll show you. In fact, none of the holy artifacts, the Ark of the Covenant and other things were in Herod's temple. It was Ichabod. His presence had not been there. And this third temple, this coming temple that Ezekiel's talking about, it would also have to follow that same pattern after what was in the heavens. Am I right? So what would the need be for describing a temple or measuring its pattern or design have to do with what's being portrayed here as national sin? Something that the Israel, not just individually, but as a nation had done regarding a previous temple had caused them to sin, and Yahweh saying, show them this temple, that pattern that's going to be coming in the future so that they can be ashamed and they will repent. And if they do that, show them what this one's supposed to be doing, what it's going to be, what its form and function is. Okay? Why should this revelation produce this shame, leading to national repentance, along with the demonstration of their shame? If they don't demonstrate being ashamed for their sin, then they will not be allowed to view this temple and understand its pattern or form. Did you see that? And if you go back and study this, the context here concerns the people that are in Babylonian captivity who had defiled the previous temple. Hello? The previous temple had been the temple that had been built by King Solomon. Now, let me just stop you here, and there's ample evidence that exists contradicting the mainstream view of Solomon's temple today, just like the mainstream view of the temple in the wilderness. They were not rectangular, they were cyclical in nature, based on the pattern of the stellar luminaries, 360 degrees cyclically. Does that make sense? Now, it was not only patterned after the zodiacal heavens, but it was oriented with a specific gate opening due east and due west in the exact pattern of Exodus chapter 12 regarding the tabernacle and how it was built and how it was fixed so that the shadow of the Tekufa could be marked. And you can see that the details of the way that the wilderness tabernacle and Solomon's temple would have been constructed, it would have allowed them to have in front of them a magnificent timepiece that would have shown them every second, every minute, every hour, every day of every year, patterned after what was in the stellar luminaries, and it would have oriented itself to every one of the 12 zodiacal houses. Every house represented one of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Every house represented one of the 12 months with 30 days of a 360-day year. Every zodiacal house had a specific part of the redemption salvific message written in it. And so as you move from one house to the next, as the sun traversed from one house to the next, like Psalm 19 depicts, it began to be a progressive rehearsal of Yahweh's redemption plan. And so if you understand what is happening here in Ezekiel regarding Solomon's temple, it's what happened there that produced their shame and caused them, in my opinion, to go into Babylonian captivity. And if you can see that, you'll find some really interesting clues regarding your future. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I want to know what's going to happen. Let's look at Solomon's temple in the Melchizedek calendar. It's my opinion that there are a number of examples in his temple that are synced with the zodiacal heavens, following that pattern just like you see with the wilderness tabernacle in both form and function. The tabernacle in the wilderness had a specific form. It's okay if you can understand that, but if you don't understand the function of that form, you've missed it. Okay? And the form and function both were specifically for calendar purposes. For instance, regarding Solomon's temple, There was a brazen laver, and we've looked at this a little bit in one of our earlier teachings, that was sat upon 12 boker, or oxen. This same laver is desecrated by Hezekiah's father, Ahaz. And he desecrates it after he is humiliated by one of the Babylonian kings named Tiglath-Pileser III, who forced Ahaz to take the brazen laver off the backs of the oxen. Go back and look at 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 17, and ask yourself, why not just raise the whole temple instead of just cherry-picking certain things that you should come against and make a public spectacle out of? Why specifically target this laver? If you understand that the laver represented the calendar of Yahweh, then it should cause the wheels inside your head to begin to turn. But there's another verse that caught my attention, and it's verse 18. In addition to taking that brazen laver off the back of those 12 oxen, he also removed the Sabbath pavilion which they had built in the temple. And he removed this pavilion which went from the king's outer entrance of his house to the house of Yahweh, and he did so on account of what the king of Assyria forced him to do. Now you have to ask yourself, wait a second, he's removing the brazen laver, which regulates all of the holy convocations of the creation calendar except for the weekly convocation called the Shabbat. And now all of a sudden you see him forced to remove the Sabbath pavilion. So you have to ask yourself, what's going on? I believe that there's a lot more here than just physically removing an archway or a walkway that would protect the king when he's walking from his house to the temple when it's raining. Are you listening to me? Okay. The word pavilion, mesek, is a covered structure. It means to protect, to weave together. And although it's a physical structure, without doubt, Ahaz removed the spiritual protection of the Sabbath that had been previously afforded the kings of Israel, while at the same time defiling the brazen laver, which I believe was connected with the spiritual protection of these divine appointments, the holy convocations that you see in Leviticus chapter 23. The Sabbath and this 360-degree laver give us insight regarding how to determine every set time appointment. And according to scholars, Hezekiah would have been able to look out of his palace eastward and watch the stairs, listen to what I just said, gradually enter into shadow from the top of the stair down. And what you're looking at is a magnificent display of an accurate sundial timepiece. And now you're beginning to see, just as we start pulling back the covers, you're beginning to see that there was some direct intentions that this king of Assyria had in mind regarding Ahaz, this wicked king, and he's causing him to bring some confusion regarding how Israel would chronicle their holy convocations. The laver. It's beyond question that this device was constructed to represent the image of the heavenlies, the 12 constellations, 12 oxen. The word laver comes from the Hebrew word kior, which means a basin or a cauldron, a furnace. The root of it hints at boring or piercing, the kaf resh root. It has the same two-letter root, kaf resh, as the Hebrew word kor, meaning lamb. Listen to me carefully. This is not an accident. This brazen laver represented something regarding the lamb. Every time the children of Israel came in contact with this brazen laver, every time the priesthood came in contact with this brazen laver, it was to remind them of the lamb. It also is the same root as the word bikorim or bikor, the firstborn. And so every time these priests came in that were defiled, listen to me carefully, by death, the blood that was on them from the dead things that they encountered, listen to me, the only thing that could save mankind was the blood of our Messiah, Yeshua. The blood of the lambs, bulls, and goats could only postpone the judgment. And so these men would come into these brazen laver, and every time they did, it was a divine appointment. There's a calendar. It's like coming in front of a great big clock. And you walk in front of that clock and you're looking in a mirror that's reflecting the stellar luminaries, and it's telling you all about the firstborn son of Elohim, the Lamb that was to save the world. And it was showing you that no matter how much you wash yourself personally, you cannot be cleansed. You can only immerse yourself into the Lamb and be clean. See that? Historically, the Lamb pictured the vernal sun at the spring equinox. And it was connected to the Lamb that you see that was chosen at Passover, the Lamb of the first year. This is interesting because throughout history, there was a connection there. And it's not an accident that it's chosen, this Lamb of the first year was chosen at Passover, which just so happens to occur during the constellational sign of Aries, the lamb or ram. In Hebrew, it's the word tele, and that word tele indicates the Lamb of Elohim. And what's more, this kaf resh root is powerful. It carries the idea of something that is round or circular, but it's also implying that this laver, because the laver would be heated, and it's actually implying that this laver served as a reverberator. How many of you have ever put a pot of water on the stove and set heat underneath it? What happens to the water inside of it? The water, as it's heated, it begins to move and it begins to change. The frequencies on the inside of this thing changes, and it has the ability, listen to me carefully, it has the ability acoustically to magnify and to amplify sound. So in other words, as this laver filled with this water that represents the Lamb of the firstborn that the children of Israel had to come and look at, especially the priests, they had to come and look at it every time they would offer up a sacrifice, or before they could go in, they had to make sure they had no death stain in them. They would look into the mirror of the Lamb, and something in there would be reverberating. Sort of reminds you of what happened when the Ruach HaKodesh hovered upon the waters of the deep there in Genesis chapter 1. Most people suppose that the laver's design pertains specifically to ritual mikvahs, but it could not have, because it was only for the priesthood. It was not available to the public. Did you hear me? And for it to serve as a ritual mikvah, it could not have been stagnant water. It would have had to have had water flowing in and water flowing out constantly, or it would not serve as living water. But this is from my personal research here. This is mind-staggering to me. I believe that served as a means to enhance acoustical amplification, to amplify sound. And you say, what? What does that mean? Scientifically, it has been proven that and it was actually proven from the scripture long before that the blood of men and animals speak. The blood of Abel speaks. The blood of our Messiah, Yeshua, speaks of better things than that of Abel. Blood can release, this has been proven today scientifically, blood releases high-frequency sound waves that contain information that is specific to the individual host. If they were to examine your blood releases certain sound waves that cannot be identified with any other entity except you. It's similar to the way that one would hear the voice of another individual and be able to recognize it and identify it. As I said, Abel's blood spoke, Yeshua's blood did, and blood, I believe, since it's congealed light from the first of creation, I believe that this laver served as a means to declare the redemption plan of creation written in the stellar luminaries, and serve as a voice or witness in the earth. And I know the first thing that people hear that and say, man, you have been smoking something. But our Messiah made this statement: if you won't praise me, then these rocks are going to cry out. Luke chapter 19, verse 40. If the stones have the ability to cry out, why wouldn't this brazen laver that's created, patterned after the stellar luminaries, contain the redemption plan of Yahweh, have the ability to release a specific frequency, letting everybody know what Abba's plan was? And I believe that this plan is eternally depicted as being administered incrementally and rehearsed at set times by a fixed eternal priesthood. Did you hear what I said? And here's something else that I found looking at this brazen laver. Go back and look at your King James, and you'll find some interesting stuff, because most people believe that the brazen laver was constructed from the bronze mirrors of the women who served at the door of the tabernacle. Anybody ever heard that? The word for mirror here is ma'ah, and it means a vision, a specific method of revelation, the act of seeing. And so when these priests would walk up to this brazen laver, based on the material that it's created from, it literally would imbue in them the ability to see prophetically. It served as a mode of revelation to those men that would attend it. Did you hear that? Where's your Bible? Anybody have a Bible in here? That Bible is a brazen laver. That brazen laver, if you will look into it, it will serve you as a mode of revelation, a means of receiving a vision. It's a mode of revelation. It gives you the ability to see. So that kind of qualifies some things, amen? So you don't think I'm a lunatic. Let's look at the word for women. I went to look. There's no word for women found in that text. It's supplied by the King James translators. The word that's translated women is found twice in that verse, and it's the Hebrew word zabah. And whenever you see it translated, it's usually rendered as a large group who are to go forth, to wage war, to mass together, to come together for the purpose of waging war, or in a communal type situation to make an announcement or a demonstration. And the first time you see this word used is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, and it says, the heavens and the earth and all the host, zavah, of them were finished. And so now if you look back at context, and that's what you should always do when you're trying to study, you have context, or pretext. Context here in 2 Kings is about an image that's built after the pattern in the heavenlies, and context should have defined the word zavah as heavenly host. It should have been patterned after the materials of the heavens, not after that of the women. Are you listening to me? And then it talks about the word door, the women that attended at the door. The word door there is patak, and it is translated door, but it comes from a word that indicates to carve something out, a breaking forth, to utter with the mouth. Are you listening to me? The laver served one purpose: to remind the Levitical priests of the pattern in the heavenlies that depicted the Lamb of Elohim who had been slain before the foundation of the world, and it reminded them that they could only minister in a temporary fashion, and that only after cleansing themselves from the blood of dead things. Moreover, this same earthly pattern clearly depicted the redemptive plan of the Creator, who had set in motion from the very beginning of creation the times that were appointed for approaching Him. And these divine times are clearly determined and revealed in the dimensions. The pi 3.14, we looked at this at length in the previous teaching. It's clearly defined in those dimensions of the laver as being wholly related, specifically related to a 360-day calendar, 360-day cycle, not 364, not 354, not 365.24. The cyclical design of the laver represented the sun traveling through the 12 houses of the zodiac, according to Psalm 19, again, which clearly represents a 360-degree calendar, patterned after the heavenly zodiac example, and it was only visible through the specific openings or gates of the tabernacle, and it was spoken by the words of the Creator, engraved upon the gates of both the tabernacle and the heavens. Did you see that? Let's look a little bit closer, because we're going to look at Ezekiel even deeper. And we're going to look at his contemporary, Daniel, because both of them point to the validity of a Melchizedek Creation Covenant Calendar that was in use in their days prior to listen to me, Yeshua coming. And you're going to see that the calendar was kept in their day just like it was in Yeshua's day. And it's going to be restored during the coming of the righteous king, the Melchizedek, in the days in front of us. Let's look at another pattern from Solomon's temple. If, according to Ezekiel 43, Israel is truly to demonstrate their shame in sinning against Yahweh by defiling Solomon's temple, then and only then will they be allowed to examine the pattern of the future temple that's being shown to Ezekiel. And so I had to ask, is it possible that slowly acclimating themselves to Babylon and subsequently embracing a lunar solar calendar whose pattern swindles and cheats all who would attempt to embrace a return to the creation calendar, could that have been the reason why? That they're shown their sin, and only after demonstrating shame that they now would be shown the form and the fashion, and which included the goings out and coming in associated with that form. Let's look again at Ezekiel 43:11. Let's look at the word form. It's the word zura, form. But it actually comes from the word zur, which indicates the foundation that's pressed out of the rock to enclose something. Let's look at the word fashion. Tekunah, arrangement, fixed places, to regulate, to measure, make even, to balance something as in weight, to try and prove it, to examine it. The root, tekan, of tekunah indicates weighing something in the balance. As soon as I saw that, I thought, that reminds me of Belteshazzar and Daniel when the hand's writing on the wall that you're being weighed in the balance, Daniel 5:27. It's not an accidental connection. If you recall the words in Daniel, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, each one of those were well-known units of measure. And the total of sum of all of those units of measure, 2,520 shekels, points again to the creation calendar's numeric signature, found only in a 360-day year, where 7 years equals 20 days, a 360-degree cycle in a 24-hour day, with 7 days gives us 2,520 degrees. Again, it's another connection to the Melchizedek Creation Calendar. You can't find the 364, 365.24, you can't find those numbers fitting. The same thing can be said here regarding Ahaz's sundial in Hezekiah's day. Remember, the sundial goes backwards 10 degrees. Have you ever asked why it goes back? So you read it in just the King James English, and if you can see my shadow here, that shadow's laying right there. If it moves 10 degrees, according to what we're about to look at, it's actually going to move 40 minutes backwards. It's not going ahead 40 minutes. That would have been easy to do. I'm going to show you why it's miraculous. 15 degrees equals 1 hour. 24 hours, 360 degrees. At the pilgrimage festivals, two specifically, the feast day, of Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Sukkot, they were 7-day festivals. And at those 7-day festivals, the pilgrims would ascend the steps of ascension for 7 consecutive days. And if you look at it, you have 2,520 or 360 days times 7. Again, the same numbers associated with the songs of ascension. And if you look at it, it's revealing the same calendar that Daniel reveals. And this is when Hezekiah's day in the sundial. It's revealing the same calendar that Daniel's revealing in his day, 75 to 100 years later, and he's pointing to it again in the future. Why would Yahweh tell us, okay, we're going to stop this, you're going to change it. Daniel's going to do this. Noah did it. Esther did it. Daniel's going to do it. And we're going to stop it. And then when Yeshua comes, I'm going to send him at a specific time based on a 360-day calendar. He's going to be born. He's going to go through this at a certain time. You'll find him at 12 years old based on this calendar. He's going to die at specific times, contraindicated by what is shown with the Hillel calendar, because there's so much confusion regarding their calendar. And there's also some confusion regarding the Roman calendar. And then you find that all of the apostles afterward, years later, including Paul and including John the Revelator, that point once again to a 360-day calendar. It seems as if Yahweh is intentionally himself putting confusion into the calendar to keep us from being able to celebrate at the right time. Or is it possible that we've been fed some disinformation and he has never changed. Think about this. How many of you know that there's 60 minutes in an hour? 60 times 24 hours gives you 1,440 minutes in a day. 4 years equals 1,440 days. As soon as I saw that, I immediately thought of the number of 144,000 in Revelation. 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. Each tribe represented one of the 12 zodiacal houses in the collective 360-degree heavens. The 144,000 are going to be singing a song that I believe is unique and peculiar to them. Listen to me well. I don't believe that everybody that calls themselves a believer is going to be singing this song. I believe this song is reserved for the bride of the King. What they're going to be singing, listen to this. They're going to be singing, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne. That establishes kingship. And to the Lamb. It's telling you that he is the one who was the instrument of salvation. He is also the one that sits on the throne, and it's connecting him to the Lamb. This is a Melchizedek declaration. The Melchizedek, the Melech king, sits on the throne, and he is being acknowledged as a source of salvation as the Lamb. Clearly, he has united the throne and the priesthood, and it's being declared for the rest of eternity by this 144,000. This is staggering. Let's go back and look at Ezekiel 43. Can y'all hold on a little while? I've got 150 more slides, and it takes about 5 minutes per slide. The words goings and comings. The word goings is motza, the act or place of going out, going forth, the rising. I believe it's specifically indicating dawn as an utterance of one spoken from the east. Isn't that interesting? If you look at the mion prefix, it indicates the place of origin, the initial place of the going forth or the rising or the dawn, if you will, of the sun. And then you have the word comings. It's the word moba, entrance, incoming, sunset. It would seem now, if we put all this together that we've been looking at regarding Israel and their shame, it caused them to be experiencing national sin. And it looks as if it was because that they had denigrated the purpose of Solomon's temple. How? By forgetting that it was patterned after the heavenlies in the same fashion as the wilderness tent. The temple, like the wilderness tent, was meant to represent the form of our Messiah Yeshua, the body, the rock of our salvation. He was the same rock that followed them through the wilderness, and he is the foundational stone upon which the bride's body is built. And if you continue to look at the phrase going out and coming in, it gives you a specific direct east and west orientation, exactly like the vernal equinox reveals the sun's position, confirming once again Psalm 19, which indicates the sun as the Messiah who is the rock, makes the same circuit that's depicted here in Ezekiel's goings and comings as he traverses through the zodiacal heavens. This is not an accident. Are you overwhelmed? Underwhelmed? And so it seems highly likely that the purpose of the Temple of Solomon, whose form, listen to me carefully because I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying. The purpose of the Temple of Solomon, whose form was like the Son of Man, was denigrated, ignored, and rebelled against, resulting in national judgment and shame. Stop. Solomon's temple was the place that represented the form and function of the body of our Messiah, just like the wilderness tent. We are to come at set times to engage him in intimacy. Am I correct? That was the sole purpose of that. That's what it was there to demonstrate. The intimacy that the bride was supposed to have with her husband. If those set times had been established after the pattern in the heavenlies, and this wicked king comes along and he removes the brazen laver and destroys the importance of the Shabbat, then I have no idea what times I'm supposed to come in to have intimacy with my husband, with my king at this holy place, this place of intimacy. So who might show up? Now, if you're ignorant to those things, Yahweh by times can excuse that. Once you learn these truths and then you go against it and you refuse it, then it puts you in a different category, which I believe is exactly what Paul's alluding to in 1 Corinthians 11:29, because he's speaking about the body of our Messiah, which is alluded to in the form of Ezekiel's temple, Solomon's temple, and the wilderness tabernacle. For he that eats and drinks unworthily, right now he's giving you a specific holy convocation. He's talking about Passover. There was a set time for Passover. He that eats and drinks unworthily eats and drinks damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. And you might say, well, what if I didn't know when it was supposed to happen? And here we are, we kept a different calendar. We were doing everything we knew to do. Now all of a sudden we know that we have the correct calendar. It puts us in a different category if we don't keep it at the set time that has been afforded us with this revelation that Abba's given us now. And I believe that as we're keeping this calendar and it is being restored, listen to me well, I believe that he is going to restore you. Everybody in here, look at me for a second. You need some restoration in your life. You need some restoration in your physical body. Some of you have been having some challenges in your mind. You've been dealing with stress and frustration and depression, and a lot of things have just been easily able to overwhelm you. You are about to be restored because of keeping the proper calendar. I believe that the restoration of this calendar, keeping these divine appointments at the right time, is going to give you some privy access about what Yahweh is going to do in the days ahead, and it is going to finance the kingdom. If you're at the right place at the right time, he's going to speak to you and he's going to say, John, go and get your neighbor's vessels and then go and take everything that has been plundered and stolen from you for the last 400 years because I have brought it to you. And it might be that he's about to tell you to go into the promised land. Don't worry about building any houses. You're going to occupy places that I had people build for you. This is what this restoration of the calendar is going to do. And we need to be rejuvenated if we're going to ever accomplish what we have been called to do. It is now, not 2 years in the future. I believe with everything in me that if we don't get this now, the door is going to be shut in a couple of years' time, and we're going to miss this. This is an opportunity for those of you that are kingdom-minded to get your butt in gear and begin to establish the foundation that he has called you to do. Put the vision, write the vision down, make the vision plain, begin to walk the vision out, stand up in the face of adversity and make the vision plain in your household first. If you plant the seed in your house, it will begin to grow in the communities and in the cities, and you will be blessed in your comings in and your goings out, just like it's declared here. Abba's about to do a new thing, and he's raising up a body of people that are not going to be denied. No longer are you going to be satisfied with the crumbs falling off the table. You are going to eat at the king's table. This is the portion and the inheritance that has been promised to you. And Abba's not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. If he said it, my goodness, he's going to do it. Get up and do something with it. This is what he's doing. You've got to get this now. You've got to get this now. You need to understand the form and function of the body of the Messiah, and that you've been called to as attendants to the king. Say amen or oh me. My goodness. We could stop. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. There's some intentional references again further on to Yeshua's body, after which the temple was fashioned, and the temple is irrefutably formed in the likeness or shadow of his body, the zelim or image of his body. The purpose of the temple, the tabernacle, served as a reminder of the presence of Elohim dwelling in the body upon the earth, and those set times in which we could access his presence at his brides. And this is what this chapter in Ezekiel is reiterating to the children of Israel. Listen to this. This got me emotional when I read this. Son of man, this is the place of my throne. He's not talking about a tabernacle built with hands. Did you hear me? He's talking about being enthroned in the hearts of his people. And he says that this is the place where the soles of my feet are. We were talking to Tim yesterday, and he was talking about how Messiah, you can look at where his feet print were, and you can see that his lifestyle emulated the pattern in the stellar luminaries. The soul, we are where the sole of his feet is. And if the sole of his feet here, and I'm carrying his feet, wherever I put my feet, that becomes my inheritance and my possession. And I will dwell, he says, in the midst of the children of Israel forever. Forever. He's speaking here of the temple. And he's also about to give you some information regarding an altar. This is another place that just blew my mind. Let me take a breath and get a drink of this water. I apologize. I want you to listen to what's about to be shared with you. There's an anomaly here. Again, if you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. If you remember the template that was given to Moshe, and he was also giving Levi instructions regarding the altar, they were told that the altar is not to be built with steps, because if they stepped up, that their nakedness would be seen. But here in Ezekiel chapter 43, this altar is portrayed as having steps and stairs, not a ramp. Now, if you just casually read that, this is a source of consternation to a lot of people, because I'm telling you, the third temple is going to be built, and their altar is going to have a ramp. It's not going to have these steps. Are you listening to me? Well, why is that? Ezekiel 17b. And its steps face towards the east. Now, this is not a matter of just semantic ambiguity. Abba's not playing with words here. He's specifically stating a change in the temple altar, allowing priestly access at certain fixed appointments. Listen to what I just said. This temple Ezekiel's talking about requires a change in the temple altar, and it's by changing that, it's also going to change how the priest would access it. And so this is also going to necessitate a change in the priesthood who attends this altar, because Levi could never go up on this altar lest his nakedness be exposed. Levi has not changed. Did you hear what I just said? That's what Ezekiel 48:11 says. Now, let's go back to Hezekiah's sundial. It says the word steps, ma'alah. Steps, stairs, thoughts, but also the steps of a sundial. The sundial was, without doubt, historically, scholarly, scientifically, it was first designed to measure a 360-day calendar year. In fact, and I have the research for you, the ancient degree symbol found in 360 degrees historically represented the sun and always stood for day. So whenever you saw 360 degrees with that degree symbol, it was actually indicating 360 days. The fact that the ancients kept a 360-day calendar can be disputed, and it will continue to be disputed, but it cannot be refuted. You can argue with me until your cows come home, but you can't change the truth, because the evidence is overwhelming. There's historical evidence. I've got some things here regarding the Hindu calendar. Let's go a little bit further. The information that I'm sharing with you just blows my mind, in particular the idea of steps to the altar. Why? Because of the intentional use. And I shared with you earlier, it's not just semantics. It's not just playing with words. Yahweh's a wordsmith. He knows exactly what he's saying and how he places it there, sometimes just by rearranging a letter in a word. And he uses this word ma'alah. And the historical evidence proves that ancient sundials were used to mark time as the shadow of the sun moved in degrees up or hours up and down the steps of a fixed device. There are some ancient pyramids that have been found all around the world, including North America, with these steps built into them. Are you hearing me? And it was not a crude method, but a highly sophisticated means of reckoning time. And this was the type of sundial that was related back here with Ahaz and Hezekiah. But I know what you're thinking. The sundial isn't circular. However, each step represents 15 degrees. 15 degrees times 24 hours in a day gives you 360 degrees. And I know, again, that sounds kind of foreign to us. Well, then you explain to me, some of my rabbinic sages, Psalm 120 through 134, the Song of Degrees. These songs of ascent were sung as they ascended. Guess what? 15 steps from the court of the women upward, 15 steps. Why do you think they had songs of degrees, songs of ascent? I'm convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it was referencing this 360-day year. Solomon's temple, like the wilderness tabernacle, would have faced magnetic east. This is important. And it would have specifically oriented itself with a Tekufa setting, the year's beginning, and marking every divine appointment, including the Shabbat. Songs of degrees, Shir HaMa'alah or Ma'alot. Have you ever looked at it? The Shin Resh root hints at regulating, directing. And it's the same root in the word that means gate or doorway, Sha'ar. And if you remember, Ma'alah is the same root for the stairs or steps of the sundial, remember? We talk about the steps of this altar versus the word for sundial. And it's interesting, just go back and do the research if you ever think about it. Right in the center of these 15 Psalms is Psalm 127, which was written by King Solomon. Psalm 127. It's preceded by 7 steps, songs, and afterward by 7 more steps and songs. Each side revealing 24 mentions of the name of Yod He Vav He. 24 times 7. In addition, 12 of the 15 have phrases from what is normally called the priestly blessing, the Aaronic benediction. I don't believe that's correct. I believe it should have been referred to as the Melchizedek priestly benediction. And there are also a lot of scholars who believe that the Song of Degrees was actually compiled by Hezekiah, specifically regarding the 15 years of added life that was confirmed by the sundial of Ahaz. Look at his words in Isaiah 38:20. Yahweh was ready to save me, therefore we will sing my songs with stringed instruments all the days of our life in the house of Yahweh. Listen to what I'm about to reveal to you. Right there in that verse, songs or stringed instruments comes from the root word nagan. It's translated here as stringed instruments, but it actually indicates to beat a tune, to thrum it, to pulsate, to reverberate, to have a specific cadence. Did you hear what I just? A frequency. How many of you realize that your body is regulated by specific cadences and frequencies? And a lot of times you go to the doctor, and the doctor will put an instrument on your chest and see what kind of cadence you have, to see your nagan. Are you listening to me? He just as easily could have said, I will set the days of my life to the specific beat or cadence in the house of Yahweh. In other words, he could have said this, I will number my days or coordinate my days with his days. I believe, just like was told King David, just like the promise that we have, with long life will I satisfy you. I believe that if you orchestrate your affairs according to the divine appointments based on this creation covenant calendar, that he will extend your life, that he will prolong your days, that he will bless your days, and not just you, but he will also cause it to be passed on down to your generations. Nagan, noon gives you a word picture that indicates life. Gimel, noon, gives us Gan Eden, the garden of appointed times. Could these songs of ascent be a rehearsal of our return to life as it was in Eden prior to the fall. I personally believe that they're linked to the sundial, which reveals the 360-degree creation covenant calendar, and that becomes a mechanism for our attending the rehearsal days in anticipation of when we will finally return. Let's look again a little bit further. Isaiah 38. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of degrees which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz. Now, there's a Dead Sea Scroll discovery, and I have that noted for you up here, that actually makes this read, I will make the shadow on the steps of the upper dial of Ahaz that marks the sun go back 10 steps. Did you read that? This is a Dead Sea Scroll discovery. And it's talking about a sundial that has 360 degrees, representing a 360-day calendar. That doesn't bode too well for Zadok and their 364-day theory, does it? Did y'all see that? I'm kind of getting this glazed-eyed look. I know you're not getting it. We're going to be here until you do. This helps explain Hezekiah's statement in verse 10. It's a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees, but let the shadow return back. So that as the sun goes down, the shadow gets longer. It goes down the steps out of the west, naturally. But if it goes back the way that it originally came, and so that was the miracle that was seen. The root of the word there in Isaiah is Allah. Once more, the same root seen previously in Ezekiel. And it's interesting because it's the direct equivalent to the Babylonian word us, meaning degree. And I have some information just I threw in there regarding the Great Pyramid, which I'm convinced was also a stepped sundial used for measuring not only time here in the earth, but patterned after the stellar luminaries. Let's look a little bit further regarding Daniel, Ezekiel, and the calendar. Most scholars agree that these two men were contemporary, Daniel, Ezekiel, along with Jeremiah, Ezra, Esther, and others. Why is this important regarding the Zadok calendar? It's simple. To validate the calendar in use during the Babylonian captivity and prior to it. We've looked at Daniel's dates, 1260, 1290, 1335. Go back and look at what happened in the time that you see regarding Esther and Ezra, because he was the scribe that wrote these things for Daniel, Esther, and I believe Jeremiah as well. Let me also remind you that Daniel was made a eunuch going into captivity in Babylon. Daniel had then no natural heirs. Furthermore, he was made chief of the Babylonian astronomers, who were also historically called magi. Accordingly, the only use of this term in the Greek Septuagint text of the Tanakh occurs in Daniel, and you can see the notations here. Why is this important? It's important because the word magi is the plural form of the Greek word used by Matthew, and it's the word magos, when he records the wise men who came from the east. They came to bring treasures to Yeshua's family. These men followed a heavenly anomaly that formed at that time a star, which was a conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Regulus in the sign of, listen to this, Aries, Tele, or Leo, which represented Judah. The movement of Jupiter at that time would have had a retrograde motion, indicating that it moved forward and it back. And it actually moved across Regulus 3 distinct times, and it's fulfilling the prophecy of Jacob back in Genesis chapter 49, 8 through 10. There's no doubt that Daniel's prophecy regarding the 70 weeks in the chronicles of his day and the future prophecies he's relating would have been known to his fellow Babylonian scholars. They would have, in turn, based on his information, precisely calculated the nativity of our Messiah based on Daniel's 360-day calendar. How else could they have been anywhere close to the birth of Messiah and the timing of their need to move down into Egypt to protect their life after 500 years keeping the wrong calendar? What was their purpose? Their purpose was to bring the inheritance of Daniel in order to fund the move of Yeshua's family to Egypt. Let me tell you, it's right on time when it gets here. It's going to be right on time. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, we've been waiting, but it'll be right on time. He's going to fund it. Yahweh's going to fund your enterprise, his enterprise that he's called you to do. The timing was not accidental. In fact, most astrologers associate the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn as the fall of one king. Saturn is the fallen king, and the rise of a new king who was called Jupiter. Jupiter, throughout antiquity, was always referred to as the king planet. The word for king is Melech. But it's interesting because his Hebrew name is Zadik. So what you had depicted in the stellar luminaries at the conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Regulus, you had a picture of a king who's being dethroned and one who's being put on the throne, a system that's being dethroned and another one rising to prominence, and it's instituting or reinstituting the Melchizedek lineage and order and throne and priesthood. Regulus is also known as the king star. It's pretty powerful. The astronomers would have known and would have announced the birth of a new world order. Why? Because the Melchizedek king and priest would finally arrive to officiate that new order based on the original Melchizedek Creation Covenant Calendar. Now, I'm pressed for time. I'm trying to get this out. I want to share something with you about this Zadok. In Ezekiel, the term sons of Zadok is used. This Zadok in his history, all you have to do is just go back and as I told you earlier, the tools are there if you want to find the research. This Zadok in his history has led to untold confusion among scholars because there's absolutely, I'm going to reemphasize that, absolutely no consensus regarding his true lineage, only supposition. And that, I believe, simply because of the biased efforts to prove that he had a Levitical connection. In fact, I believe the existence of Zadok is detrimental to the existence of the Levitical priesthood. This term, sons of Zadok, is unique to Ezekiel. Moreover, there is no reference at all to a Zadokite priesthood in either Deuteronomy. Why? Why is that important? Because Deuteronomy gives you the law regarding the lineage of Aaron and the sons of Levi. And there's no record in the Chronicles account of a Zadokite priesthood. That should raise concern because that functioned as a historical account in a lot of different instances. And so you have to go back and answer these questions. There are records of a Zadok found in Chronicles. Again, he's not found in Genesis through Deuteronomy, which supports the claim of many that he had no Levitical or Aaronic ancestry. He had no beginning or no end. Isn't that odd? Who was he? Especially as Ezekiel, this is important, Ezekiel declares that when this altar is built that has steps instead of a ramp, that only the sons of Zadok may approach the altar. That is detrimental again to the house of Levi and Aaron. Many believe he was in fact a priest of Jebus who rose to favor with King David prior to conquering Jerusalem and afterward. In fact, go back and study it. King David actually splits the priesthood into two distinct groups. One after Abiathar, the last of Eli's descendants out of Levi, and this guy named Zadok. You have to ask yourself, King David wanted to build the temple. He was not allowed to build the temple because he was a bloody man, but he was able to gather everything necessary for Solomon to build the temple, and he intentionally splits the priesthood. You have to ask yourself, why? Why? My wife asks me all the time, why, David? Why? It brings up an interesting point, and it has not been satisfied by scholars historically. And they state that the priest arose at that time out of royal appointments, and it stood in stark contrast to the Levitical lineage during the monarchies. And let me share this with you. That was very apparent in Yeshua's day, where Annas and Caiaphas, who were not Levitical successors, but were political appointees who colluded with Rome to usurp the Levitical order. Are you listening to me? So let me present to you just a slightly different look. Because when you look at Zadok, there are echoes of the priest of Salem, Melchizedek, found in that name, Zadok. Genesis 14:18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of El Elyon. It seems to me from digging out of this history and digging things out of the scriptures that Zadok could have been a title, just as you see in Joshua chapter 10, verse 1, where you find a king that Joshua stands against named Adonizedek. Same root word as Zadok. He was also king of Jerusalem. And again, history reveals that Jerusalem was originally called Yebus, translated as threshing place, from a root that indicates to tread down, reject, and desecrate. It's cognate with the word Yebush, or Yebash, which you see in Genesis 1:9, where the dry land is separated from the waters under the heavens. You have to ask yourself why there's connections here in the Hebrew language. If you just rearrange the letters, it gives you the Hebrew word yeshav, which means to dwell with, to cohabitate with in marriage. And so what it seems to me as I look at this ancient name, Yebus, that it's actually foretelling of the desecration of this area that's now being called the city of David, also known as Jerusalem. And you have to ask yourself, why would this name record such stuff? Is it possible that Jerusalem could have been built upon the ancient site of the Garden of Eden? I believe so. And if it is, it could also explain the euphemistic term called threshing place, because the threshing place is associated with judgment, especially as it regards the desecration of the dwelling place or the garden of appointed times, Eden. Further, since, listen to me carefully, Remnant of Truth International, since Yahweh Elohim always has a remnant, wouldn't it be prudent for him to have a remnant of kings and priests continually guarding access to his holy place? I believe throughout recorded history he has. In fact, let me read something to you from Psalm 76, 1 and 2. To the chief musician on Neginoth, a psalm or song of Asaph. And let me look at the word musician. It's the word natsah, to shine from a root that means perpetuity, longevity, and endurance in time. Neginoth, it comes from the word nagon. Did you hear that? And it's talking about Yahweh dwelling in Israel. And Salem will also be his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. Did you see that? And then you look at that word esaph, to gather, to assemble, to cause, to congregate, to take to oneself, to bring up in the rear. Again, the context here is in regard to Elohim dwelling in Jerusalem from creation forward. And he's setting there a light beacon that will mark the beat or cadence of life that is pulsating and drawing the assembly or congregation of the righteous to this place. At the same time, it is judging those who would oppose him. It sounds just like Genesis 1:2. In the midst of tohu vabohu, the spirit of Elohim is once again vibrating upon the waters, just like you see in that brazen laver. As it's heated up, it begins to reverberate and vibrate. It's indicating judgment that is ensuing as the blood is washed off into the laver. And so this explains the restoration of this area spoken of in Genesis 14 to the descendants of Abraham that Melchizedek promised. And it's my belief that this same individual, this Melchizedek from Genesis 14, has transferred his title to his future followers. And in support of that, in 2010, an archaeologist discovered an ancient structure in the city of David just above Gihon Springs, one of the four rivers said to have had its headwaters in Eden. He discovered a structure that was believed to have been the Melchizedek temple. And it's also worth noting that in that particular temple was pottery that dated all the way back to the time of Hezekiah. Why is this important? In my opinion, it's important because there's evidence that the name Melchizedek could just as easily have been a title. Again, Adonai Zedek, Joshua 10. It's my opinion that the man that King David later appointed, listen to me carefully, alongside the Levitical priest Abiathar, this man called Zadok, it's my opinion that he was actually a priest after the order of Melchizedek, not a high priest, one of the sons of Zadok, one of the sons of righteousness, out of whom would arise servants who would later be called the sons of Zadok, sons of righteousness. And it is these sons of righteousness that Ezekiel is referring to, who will attend this altar that does not have a ramp, because there's no need to be concerned about the nakedness of being exposed any longer, because the high priest of all the kingdom made his mission manifest in the earth to restore the Melchizedek king, priestly throne, and forever would be established in the heavens and in the earth as the only one who could satisfy the judgment of blood in the earth. And so this is who the sons of Zadok are. And this is going to continue until the righteous King Yeshua would establish that throne and the throne in the priesthood. And his servants are going to officiate at the millennial temple that I believe Ezekiel's talking about. And if you're skeptical, probably still are, you have to ask yourself, Shepherd John and I were talking about this. There was several prominent groups in Yeshua's day, Pharisees, and one of those was the Zadoksees, also known as Sadducees, who stood in stark contrast to the Pharisees. I want to read to you Ezekiel 48:11. I'm 2 minutes over. Can y'all hold out for a few more? Nobody said anything? Can I get a witness? Is anybody saved in the house? Ezekiel 48:11. It, the sanctuary, shall be for the priests of the sons of Zadok, who are sanctified, who have kept my charge. Listen to me carefully. Who did not go astray when the children of Israel went astray, as the Levites went astray. I also contend that Zadok would have adhered to the Melchizedek Creation Covenant priestly calendar of 360 days, not 364, as purposed by many. The 364-day Enoch and Zadok calendar is fraught with error, and I am convinced, listen to me, based on what I've looked at, associating it with this Zadok and the sons of Zadok is an insult in the highest order. Few people that adhere to those calendars are going to be satisfied with what I've shared, but we're going to continue to share as Yahweh reveals these things and provide what I believe. I believe the evidence is irrefutable, and I'm convinced that Yahweh is restoring our understanding of his creation calendar for the express purpose of building his body and raising that body up now as we speak. Thank you for listening. Shalom Aleichem.